If you think that sales writing doesn't matter, think again. Let's start by addressing the obvious question. Why bother with sales writing? Well, the first reason is that your writing can go places where you can't go. Imagine that key meeting where all of the main decision makers are getting together to decide whether to proceed with the product. Odds are that you are not present for that meeting, but your writing can be there. They can refer to the written materials that you prepared for them, if those materials are good enough. The next big reason is credibility. If you write well, you're going to find that you get access to more of those critical conversations. That VP who's a key decision maker, if they see that your written product is persuasive and useful, they may decide that talking to you is a good use of their time. The next is applicability. Good writing skills are good persuasion skills in general. If you learn to write well, you'll learn to speak well, you'll learn to present well. It's all kind of a piece. And the final point, maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but technology is making good writing skills even more important. You might think that ChatGPT is going to eliminate the need to be a good writer, but really what it's going to do is it's going to make it easy to produce large volumes of first draft writing. Well, really good writers can take those first drafts from AI and turn them into truly excellent work product. They're going to become even more effective as technology improves. So what are you going to get from this presentation? Well, two main things. First, I'm going to share with you a 4-part plan for persuasive sales writing. And second, we'll point you to access to templates that you can start using now. So let's dive in. Today we'll talk about 4 keys to great writing. We'll talk about defining the purpose and issues of your writing, coming up with a matching structure, making powerful points, and finally bringing it all together with a really strong writing process. So let's start by defining purpose and uncovering issues. So you need to start out by defining your main point or your purpose, right? What is it that you want your audience to do or to decide? Next up, define the issues. What are the questions that your audience is going to ask themselves when they evaluate your main point? So let's look at some examples of how to define a main point and the associated issues. So imagine that your main point is that your prospect should bring their vice president to a call. What are the issues that they're naturally going to consider as they evaluate that point? They're going to think about how that would help them, how it would help the VP, and how it would help their company as a whole. Another main point, let's say you're asking someone to approve budget for a purchase. What are the issues they'd consider? Well, they might break it down in terms of the product's benefits and the product's costs. Next up, let's talk about how to define a matching structure that addresses the main point and those issues. We'll talk about the basic structure and then look at some applications, such as structures with independent reasons, structures with linked reasons, and then an issue-by-issue comparison. So the basic structure is just that. State a clear main point that says what you're asking them to do or to believe, and then give reasons. The key is that those reasons need to address the issues that are on their mind as they consider your main point. There's 2 other things you might include. You might include a bit of a warm-up that affirms the relationship or gives some context, and you might also specify the next steps. It's important to do that if it's not obvious what they should do if they agree with your main point. So let's look at an example of the basic structure. This is the Affirm, Ask, Benefit framework, and you're going to use this for maybe half of your substantial sales emails. The purpose is to get a prospect to take a next step that advances the sales process, and then the issues they're going to consider are how the next step is going to benefit them. So we're going to break it into 3 sections: a warm-up where we affirm the relationship, our main point, which is what we're asking them to do, our reasons, which are the benefits of taking that next step. So here we are, simple email. We start out by affirming the relationship by saying it was great to meet. We state our main point, which is to ask the VP to join us. And then we give our reasons, right? Why will it be a good use of their time to have the VP join the call? Now, as we get into more complex emails, it'll be very important for us to stay organized. So let's look at two really important tools for doing that: paragraphs and section breaks. So for shorter emails, oftentimes all you'll need are some appropriate paragraph breaks. So here's an example based on what we just saw on the prior slide. We started out with a warm-up. We had a paragraph break. We stated our main point. We had a paragraph break. And then we gave our reasons, right? Those paragraph breaks clearly separated the different major points in our email so that they were very clear to the reader. Another tool you can use is section headings. Now, these are really useful if you have many points in each section. So imagine an email where we're asking someone to approve a purchase, right? This email makes a lot of different points. But really, they kind of break up into two major buckets: benefits and costs. So here we've put in section headings that separate those two major buckets. Separating the email into sections makes it much easier to remember and understand. Now let's look at some applications of this structure. The first one we'll look at is an independent reasons structure. The idea of this is that the reasons stand on their own. The reader can disagree with one reason without it impacting the other reasons. The great thing about this structure is that it is incredibly simple to use. So let's dive into an example. We'll have a main point, our reasons, and our next step. Our main point: you should make a purchase. Our reasons: benefits are high, costs are low. And our next step: sign the contract by September 30th. Now, the key point here is that the reader could disagree with our estimate of the costs, but still agree with the estimate of the benefits and with the main point. In other words, the reasons are independent. They stand on their own. The next structure we'll look at is a linked reason structure. In this structure, the reasons build on each other, gathering momentum as they go. This is a very powerful structure, but it's also more complex. Let's look at an example. We'll have our main point, our reasons, and our next step. Our main point, as before, is that you should make a purchase. But this time, our reasons are going to follow the problem, solution, impact structure, which is a linked reasons structure. Problems lead to solutions, which lead to impacts. So we start with our problem. You're behind on lead generation because your outbound response rates are too low. That problem leads to our solution. We help you raise response rates with AI-driven, customized outbound outreach. Notice that the solution naturally follows from the problem. If I agree with the definition of the problem, that sets up my solution to be exactly the right one. Next up, our impact. This will drive 25% more pipeline, which helps you hit your annual revenue targets. Right? Once again, the reasons build on each other. If I believe the solution, then that sets up the impact to be that much more persuasive. This type of linked reason structure is very, very powerful, but it's important to kind of build it the right way. In P.S.I. selling, we recommend having the company define the typical problems, solutions, and impacts, which we refer to as your product themes, and then giving those to the sales team so that they can adapt those general product themes to their deal, creating what we refer to as deal themes. This basically gets you the best of both worlds. You get a really powerful linked reason structure, but you also get something that's very easy to deploy in the field. And of course, it all adds up to what we all care about, which is a signed contract by the end of the quarter. Another common structure is an issue-by-issue comparison. Now, this is really useful when buyers are comparing your product against others. You're going to define the issues that they should consider and then say why you win. And that's really the key, right? You are not just telling them why you should win, but you're guiding their thought process, kind of getting inside of that decision-making process. So we'll have a main point, reasons, and a next step. Main point, our product is better. But here our reasons are the 3 issues that they should consider. Our next step is that they should sign the contract by September 30th. Now let's look inside each of these reasons. So for each of these reasons, what we're really saying is, hey, this is an issue you should consider. And typically the issue is something that the product needs to do in order to be the right product for them. We'll say why it's important, and then we'll say, hey, we deliver on this issue and competitors don't. And we'll do the same for the second issue and for the third issue. Now, really key point here. One common pattern you'll see is that the issues someone should consider are the same as the problems that your product solves. In other words, issue one is, do you solve problem one? Issue two is, do you solve problem two? Issue three is, do you solve problem three? Right? The right product is the product that solves all three of the key problems. And so what you're seeing here is that the idea of the P.S.I. structure kind of recurs throughout your sales process in a lot of different forms, right? Having defined the problems that you solve, that then becomes your template for the issues that you think that your prospect should consider when they're making a decision about what to purchase. Now, one really key point here is that credibility is key. So it is totally fine to say that you win on the first two issues and maybe the third issue is a little bit too close to call. In that case, your kind of thesis might be, hey, issue one is the most important issue. We clearly win on that. Issue two is really important. We win on that. Issue three, it's less important and it's kind of hard to tell who wins on that one, but add it all up and our product is the best, right? It's much better to be kind of even-handed and maintain your credibility than it is to kind of reach and try to say that you're 1,000 times better at literally everything. The more credible you are, the more likely it is that they will take your framing of the issues and use it when they make their decision. Now, another way to do the issue-by-issue comparison is to create a grid. This can work better as a PDF or a spreadsheet or a presentation. So it's literally that. You're literally building a grid. So the idea is that the overview says who wins on each of the issues and also gives a sense of how important that issue is, right? So for issue one, it might say, we solve problem one and problem one is the most important problem for you. And then the other columns provide some analysis for each of the different products. And then rows say, kind of give that analysis for each of the different issues. Next up, let's talk about how to make powerful points. In this section, we'll cover points, reasons, examples, and applications. So the key idea here is that persuasive writing makes clear points, and points are a conclusion that the reader cares about. Together, all of your points support the main point of what you're writing. So let's take our example of the cost-benefit email. Right? As we look through this email, what we see is that we're making a large number of points that together support the main point that you should approve the purchase. The key is to make your points well supported. And the way that you'll do that is with reasons, examples, and applications. Let's look at an example. Our product will cut distribution costs by shortening delivery times. One comparable store chain saw distribution costs drop by 20%. In your case, that would mean a savings of $1 million per year. So this is a very well-supported point. Let's have a look at why. So what you see here in blue is that we have our point, a conclusion that the reader cares about. Next, in green, we have a reason that says why the point is true. Then we have an example, right? This is a case where the point is true. And then finally, we have an application that applies the principle to the reader's own situation. So the reader understands why this point is so important. So how do you generate reasons, examples, and applications? Well, one way to do that is to imagine yourself using certain phrases as you write. So to generate reasons, imagine that you're using the word because. To generate examples, imagine that you're using the phrase for example. For applications, imagine that you're using the phrase in your situation that would mean. Now, To be clear, you don't always need reasons, examples, and applications for every single point that you make, right? Some points are more important than others, and you want to be as brief as you can. Another key idea here is that you definitely don't need these phrases all the time. In other words, use these phrases in your head as you're writing, because it'll help you generate the ideas, but you might end up cutting them out of your final draft because sometimes they add unnecessary words. Finally, let's look at how to bring all of this together in a really strong writing process. We'll talk about outlining, drafting, and editing. So outlining, how do you put all of this together? Well, start out by defining your main point. What do you want them to do or believe? Next, define the issues, right? What issues will they consider in evaluating your main point? Then think about a structure that matches those issues. Separate your sections with paragraphs or headings. Group your related points together. And then finally, think about the points that address the issues that they'll consider. Now, draft your email. So first drafts are always too long, and that's totally fine. It's good to just get your ideas out there and then select the best ideas to actually use. As you're drafting, be sure that your main point is clear and check that the most important points are well supported. Next up comes editing. And the first thing to do when you edit is to make sure that your main point is obvious. So here's an example of a buried main point, right? We've got a substantial email here, and the main point is kind of the third sentence inside the middle of a big paragraph. It's hard to find it. Now we're going to make that main point obvious. We're going to take exactly the same text and split it up so that it's very clear what that main point is. Here, what we're using is a very common technique. We've just taken the main point and we've put it all alone in its own paragraph so that it is totally impossible to miss. Next, look for ways to break up long paragraphs. So here's an example of having too many points in one paragraph. So we've got a substantial paragraph that's all about a revenue lift. and really, we kind of got a couple of different points here. We've got lead generation, and we've also got conversion rates in the same paragraph. So now let's split it up so that we've got separate points in separate paragraphs. We've got kind of our major point here about the revenue lift, and then we've got our two supporting points, lead generation and conversion rates. This is much easier to read and much easier to skim over and kind of get the main idea. Next up for editing is to be direct and specific. So here's a kind of before and after example of being direct. So we've all written sentences like this. There's this big kind of prefatory phrase, and then we kind of get to the point at the end of the sentence. We've all done it. Just be sure that you edit it so that you're not doing that in your final draft. So after, we're getting to the point much more quickly and kind of putting the prefatory material at the end, right? So just look for ways to take those introductory phrases and either move them to the end of the sentence or maybe to a separate sentence. Another key idea is to be specific. And so here's an example of something that a boss of mine actually said. He said, we have the premier web-based solution for team resource planning. Okay, what does that mean? Like, obviously, we do have the best solution, but when you say that we have the premier solution, like what does that mean? How do we know if that's true or false? Well, here's a different kind of way to make the same point. Our team resource planning solution generates lasting efficiency improvements. We got the highest ratings from Gartner for lifetime value, right? So what's different there, right? We're making a point that can be proven true, and then we're giving the reasons and examples that prove that point. Doing that makes us much more persuasive. Next up, let's look for ways to cut out fluff. Everybody's first draft is too fluffy. That's fine. Just look for ways to cut it out, right? So here's a typical kind of first draft. It was wonderful to see you. It was so much fun. Wasn't it great? That was just the best, right? these are fluffy phrases. You need some of them to be friendly, but you don't need this many. So here's a revised version. It's still friendly, but it's also much more to the point. We're kind of quickly acknowledging the relationship and then giving a summary and kind of stating our ask. So how do you cut out fluff? Well, first of all, reduce the number of adjectives. You don't need too many words like wonderful, fun, the best, great. And then just in general, experiment with deleting things, like delete words, delete phrases. If it doesn't change the meaning and it doesn't make it sound harsh, then just go ahead and cut it out. Finally, you want to check for tone. Precise writing can sometimes sound a little bit harsh. So, read your email out loud, see how it sounds. And if it sounds a little bit unfriendly, then go ahead and add back a few adjectives or a few relationship-oriented phrases. That's totally fine. So how do we take this forward? Well, check out the P.S.I. Selling website where you'll see value emails like business cases and competitive comparisons. And you'll also see templates for process emails like call follow-ups and complex call agendas. We're also building an AI prompt that will help you edit and generate emails. And all of that is available at www.psiselling.com. And most importantly, as always, happy selling.